One of the more painful places to be is when you feel deep down in your gut that you're not getting the whole truth from your spouse. Are you in the exhausting cycle of questions, defensiveness, arguments, questioning what to do, questioning your reality, or even experiencing the silence that feels like a second betrayal? I remember experiencing parts of this in my own journey, and today I'm with Rick Reynolds, our founder of Affair Recovery, to get expert answers on how to break this devastating cycle. Over the next few minutes, Rick is going to give you the tools to actually break through that silence without starting another fight. We're even going to tackle questions of how you decide to stay or go. We'll also talk about what to do when you feel like you're going crazy, that you cannot stop replaying the lies in your head. Make sure to stay until the end, because Rick will also share the single most important first step you can take to begin your own healing, regardless of what your partner chooses to do. These are actual questions we hear all the time, both in the comments and from people who call into our team asking for help. And if this video is helpful for you, or you have other questions, drop them in the comments and we're going to do our best to answer them in future videos. Rick, we hear this all the time on our calls with people, this question of what to do when you feel like you're not getting the answers. Why do you think this comes up so often? And I'm sure you see it in your practice a lot too.
I think there's several motivations that keep people from telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Sometimes I believe it is shame, and being able to be authentic is something that was never really taught. Next, there are times that obviously the betrayed spouse isn't safe enough to share the information. That happens sometimes. Something that Peggy Vaughn said that I really appreciated is to get her husband to be able to share, she kind of learned that she could only show 15% of the emotion she was feeling, because whenever she shared all of her emotion, it was overwhelming to him and he would shut down because then he'd spiral into shame. And I know that's not necessarily fair, but it does have to also be safe enough to share. Sometimes people don't share because they fear losing the relationship. Sometimes people don't share because they want to control the flow of information to kind of manage their spouse's responses. And the next one is sometimes people don't share because they want their cake and eat it too. And they literally gaslight and tell the other person they're crazy because they really don't want to stop the behavior. Also, when the wayward spouse is telling trickle truth and not sharing everything at once, that continual trauma being presented by the trickle truth only adds to the complexity of the healing that that person has to ultimately go through. So it's really quite psychologically abusive. Whether or not they're doing it for self-protection or they're trying to manipulate the other person, it's still going to do a lot of damage.
I know it's one of the phrases we use a lot at Affair Recovery is the phrase trickle truth, but can you explain what that is?
Trickle truth is where someone shares a certain amount of the story, but they hold another piece back, and then their mate asks the right question or they feel convicted and they share the next piece of the story, but they still keep other things back. And so over and over again, there are multiple discoveries and disclosures. And every time you get those new disclosures, they have to rewrite the entire story again. And it's very damaging psychologically to the betrayed spouse.
For us, there was 2 D-Days, so there were 2 instances of disclosure. And I remember that exact thing. Like when I got the second amount of information, it kind of set me back a couple of months because it had been months in between the 2. And it feels like I started all over. Whereas it would have put me kind of at, to use the phrase, ground zero, to have all the information to work with initially and move forward from there, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a huge setback. And for some people, it's just, you just hit the start button again and you're starting all over.
I want to read with you one of the questions that we've received, and it's, my spouse admitted to some infidelity, but I believe there's more. How do I get them to tell me everything?
There are 2 ways to interpret that. One, when she says, I believe there's more, I don't know if there's more or there isn't more. So if there's not more, then what do you do? If there is more, how do you get them to share? It's a hard question because I certainly have worked with people, I think, who have done a great job at disclosure. And if I can explain how I like to see disclosure done, I prefer for someone to go back into their life, write a full narrative of everything that happened from the beginning to here, to where they are at that point in time. When you write that narrative, you're far more likely to be able to remember everything. When you're just answering questions, what happens is that there's like holes in the timeline. So the narrative is, in my opinion, the best way to go about writing it. Another place that makes this complicated, let's say that their spouse has made multiple disclosures, it's a lot of trickle truth. When they say that's everything, which is probably what they said every time after the last disclosure, it is impossible to believe that that's everything. And in those situations, I typically recommend a polygraph only because there's no way for them to know. Simply because of that trickle truth, why would they lean into it? And even if the story stays the same, with all the damage done, with that extended disclosure over time, they're going to need something really solid to plant their feet on to be able to believe it.
Another one we got in, I just want to read you this one word for word, because I think you can kind of hear what they're really longing for in this question is, my spouse's silence is painful. What can I actually do to break through their defensive wall without just starting another fight?
What goes through my head when I hear that is, why the heck are they silent? Because the fact is, if your spouse isn't responding to you and they're staying silent and staying disengaged, they're not trying to work at reconciliation. There's something wrong there. And I think that was one of those places you set a boundary and you say, look, you either let me in and we're going to work on this thing, or we're not. But if you're choosing to remain silent, because that's not safe for me, if you're choosing to remain silent, then you need to leave, because I don't want to be in a relationship or try to even reconcile a relationship until you're willing to be a part of it. And right now you're not willing to be a part. Kicking them out is probably a really good thing when there's just silence.
These conversations are so difficult because they're so nuanced and situation specific, because, somebody could watch this video and then go to their spouse and say, you're not answering questions the way that I want, and Rick told me to tell you to get out, right? And that's not the intention of this. We ultimately want safety in these scenarios, in these relationships. As you're talking, I'm just going, man, I think if anybody like me is watching, I want concrete answers, practical, black and white. This is what you do and this is how you're going to solve the problem. And I'm just reminded through these questions that people have that it's not concrete. It's so much grayer than we want it to be. And that's why, we always talk about the significance of being in community where you can share this emotional weight with other people. It's why our courses are designed the way they are. And in a lot of ways with these situations you're talking about, because we're asking questions from people and you're asking questions back. And that's what a therapist would do, sitting in the room with you and helping you kind of navigate the nuances of your situation, right? These are complicated things that are bigger than just a Q&A on a video.
Right. And I think in response to that, I'm referring to a situation where you've just discovered some sort of betrayal. You're trying to get them to talk to you about it, and they're just refusing to engage. So in that initial piece, if they're not even willing to start trying to reconnect or reconcile, that's really not safe. And I wouldn't even know that they've broken things off. That's why I say you need to take some pretty radical action. Let's give another scenario on silence. Let's say you've gone through a disclosure, they've written everything out, and you keep asking questions and they just go silent. In that scenario, I still don't think it's good. I think they should continue to give the same answer over and over again, because the silence isn't, it's a disconnect, and that is not what the betrayed spouse needs. But there's a third scenario that silence happens, and that's when the wayward spouse is actually traumatized. And if you're emotionally dysregulated, then the wayward spouse could sit there and go to what we call a dorsal vagal collapse, where they literally, their heart rate moves from 80 down to 50, and it looks like they're going to sleep, and they're just lethargic and don't do anything. That's a trauma situation. So that has nothing to do with answering or not answering. It has everything to do with trauma work that person needs to do. So there really are multiple situations within silence that could all have different response patterns.
And I guess, we're talking about big decisions and people responding with more big decisions. And I just think, I have this phrase that someone told me at one point, like, don't make big decisions on bad days. And there's a lot of bad days going on. And that's where I think I would just encourage people, based on the different situations you're talking about, to seek help. Don't make these big decisions in a vacuum or in isolation. You got to get someone on the other side of you who can look at the situation with objectivity and help you walk through the really complicated waters that you're in. One of the biggest questions I think we hear all the time is, how do I know if I should stay or go? And I think you alluded to this a little bit already, but if someone's sitting in your office saying, I'm trying to figure out if I should stay or go, what do you say?
I think first off, that's pretty doggone normal, not knowing. For the betrayed spouse in particular, that ambivalence about whether or not you want to be in the relationship is natural. So whether you want to stay or go, it all depends. What I always tell people is, you certainly don't want to be married to the person who did this to you. If somebody isn't safe, why would you want to be with them? So it's natural to go, nope. Over time, if people do the work, they can also change. And one of the things I remember telling Stephanie years ago was, look, I don't blame you for not wanting to be married to me. I don't blame you for wanting to divorce me. I would divorce me if I could. Holy smoke. I'm a train wreck. But I really am going to work at trying to become, I think, the person I was meant to be, somebody I can be proud of, somebody I can respect. And if I do that, I might become somebody you want to be with. For that reason, if you would give me the time to see whether or not I follow through with that, then I think you'll get your answer. And that's what I tell people. Make a decision in the beginning to decide not to decide. Give it at least a year and see, are they committed to never being that other person again and doing the work they need for transformation? Because they can become somebody different, but it's not just them saying, I won't ever do this again. That would make me ambivalent if I was married to somebody. Rather, stand back and observe, spectator, see if they're working hard at becoming somebody new. Stephanie still tells me, I'm not that fond of my first husband, but I like the second. But you won't know whether they're going to become kind of that new person unless you at least give it the time to see if there's a chance. And it's okay to wait a while and observe and see what happens, because it'll take time for them actually to change and to deal with the issues that are underneath all of this, to deal with that developmental trauma and those strategies that they were using that did not work.
And I would even encourage someone watching and listening, wrestling with that question, to kind of shut out the noise, perhaps, of what other people would think or say about you. Like, most people don't know all the nuances of your situation. Like, if somebody doesn't have all the pieces or they're not educated on this. I've just noticed that even after releasing my own content on our story, just looking at comments going like, if you didn't have kids, just leave. Like, there's this default thing in our culture or in our assumptions, like, if this happens, you leave. That's what you do. And you and I both know, being on the other side of this and seeing so many stories, that that shouldn't be the default approach, that there is actually a way to heal from this, to recover from this, if both people are willing to do the work. And that's something worth exploring.
It really is. I remember a group that Leslie and I went up to Salt Lake City to do kind of a smaller EMS weekend for multiple couples, and there were 5 women who had been betrayed, and they'd all been betrayed in their first marriages and remarried. And when we were finishing one of the sessions, one of the ladies said, we've been talking and every one of us agrees with this one thing. If we had known back then what we know now, we would have actually tried to work things out in our first marriages. Every one of them just hit the eject button. We would have tried to work things out in the first marriage, because the devil you know is a lot better than the one you don't. And none of us suspected when we married our second husbands that we'd end up in the same place again. In some ways, we would have been better off to see if they were going to do the work to change. And some of them actually did. And now I look at them and go, dang, I wish I'd stayed. But again, you don't know that stuff unless you give it some time to see if they're going to do the work. It's interesting in some of our research on shame for the betrayed spouse, the one thing that the wayward spouse can do to make them feel honor again, to make them feel safe, is to work a really strong recovery program. And when somebody does that and they're learning how to be a whole person, how to be authentic, how to live according to their morals and values, hey, that person can be a great person to be married to. But if they don't do the work, the odds of them doing it again are like 99%. So they're not safe.
And I remember that's the posture that I would describe my wife in when we began to do recovery work. It was just a posture of repentance. It was recognizing what she'd done and wanting to turn and go in a different direction and doing the work and having the conversations and joining the programs that helped do that.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, it's great if you use that pain as somehow a way to grow and as a motivation to be transformed and be just a better person.
I like the phrase eject button that you use there, because I think the conclusion here is don't hit the eject button in isolation and don't hit the eject button right away. That might be the conclusion, perhaps, that we'll come to it, depending on, because it takes two people to ultimately reconcile a relationship. But don't hit it in isolation and don't hit it automatically, because there could be something on the other side of this that's really, really good.
And I think this is also where community really, really comes in. Because in community, you get a different vantage point of your spouse as you look at the other couples and you're going, oh, well, actually, I've been seeing them negatively like this. But as I look around the group, they're more like this. And it's literally, we can really distort who they are. It gives you ways to see them differently, but it also gives them ways potentially to see themselves differently. And that's going to be a big deal. That negative lens that you can have from all the hurts in the marriage, even prior to the infidelity, can really distort things. I've had couples in my office where they are telling me how there's no redeeming value, there's nothing good about this person. And I'll sit there and say, actually, I know people who know you both, and they both think quite highly of you. How is it that other people see good qualities in you, but the two of you can't see anything good in each other? And I do think it's hard when we have hurts and wounds. It does distort how we see them, and it takes time to begin to shift that historical lens so that you can see them as they really are, or hopefully even as they're changing.
For you and I, we sit on we don't feel it the same way we did at once in our lives, but we sit on the other side of it and we see it and we know it's excruciating to hear, even for somebody to go, all they want to do is hit the eject button, and we're saying, don't hit it just yet, and don't just make that decision in isolation. You got to get in that community that can help you figure out what's best. And that's really, really hard to do, but it's really, really worth it as well.
It's scary also. I want to acknowledge that, especially if you've told a lot of people, and maybe even in spite of that, where you may be getting even pressure, like you're crazy if you stay here. I mean, our culture is far more accepting of somebody just, hitting that eject button than they are of someone being curious and compassionate and exploring whether or not there's anything here worth salvaging, if there aren't advantages to stay. But it's so complicated, and the people on the outside, they see things black and white, and people always know what they would do if they were in your situation, they think, but they don't know until they get to that situation. So talking to people who haven't gone through this and don't know how to navigate it oftentimes isn't very helpful.
Another question that kind of taps into that pain that people feel, this person said, Rick, my brain feels broken. How do I fight that internal voice of doubt and start to believe that the I love you that they say is different than it was?
My first thought is they don't need to be telling you that they love you. I would hope they're showing you that they love you. And second, if I were working with them, I would encourage them not to say, I love you, to say it maybe once or twice. The problem is when they say that I love you to somebody who's ambivalent, because this person's absolutely right, you feel this almost guilt if you don't reciprocate. I mean, they put you in a really awkward position. They need to be respectful. They can let you know, and they can say, you don't have to respond, but I want you to know I really care. I think the reason it's hard to believe, well, there's multiple reasons. The primary reason it's hard to believe, though, is judgments. When I acted out, I still really cared for Stephanie. At the same time, I mean, that was impossible for her to believe that I really cared for her. I mean, because what I did was not loving at all. But we can only judge another person's motives by what it would mean were we to do the same thing. And I know that if Stephanie had an affair, she would have to be completely disconnected from me before she could do that. So for her, if she tries to understand me through the lens of who she is, she knows that there's no way I could care for her and do that. So I think a lot of times if people can step back and say, okay, if I had an affair, what would my motives be? And if that motive would be, I would have to loathe the other person and not want to be with the other person. It may be a judgment where you're judging their motives, but their motives may have been very, very different. I understand that what I'm saying is a generality, but it's hopefully just a way to think about it differently, to understand that somebody may still care if they say they still care, even though it doesn't make sense to you. And the alum couple at the EMS this past weekend, in terms of lessons learned, and this is a tough one, what he said was, one of the things I had to accept is I was never going to fully understand why. And I had to let go of my pursuit of understanding why, because it was never going to make sense. And I had to accept that I'm not sure my mate was ever going to fully understand why. The fact is, it's complicated, and there were lots of factors. And if she doesn't necessarily understand all the whys, how can I? And I had to let go of that pursuit for my own peace of mind.
Another question, we're getting close to wrapping up here, is what can I do to make them get healing? And we hear this one all the time.
There's a thing called agency. And in our check-in before each lecture at EMS, we always start with, I'm responsible for me and I'm choosing to be safe for us. And we would love to be able to change our mate. I tell people sometimes, I used to pray that God would give me the gift to be the Holy Spirit, not the gift of the Holy Spirit. Because I figured if I could be the Holy Spirit, maybe I could convict somebody and make them do something. But the fact of the matter is, I was never given that gift. All I can do is change me. It's that serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I can't change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And my mate is one thing I can't change. I can share how they're impacting me and what they're doing, or if that's hurting me, so that they can understand that. And they will either, if we have a strong attachment, they will go, okay, well then I don't want to hurt you. And they'll want to change. If someone, though, doesn't, if they're just hard-hearted and they're just saying, look, get over it, then again, we're back at that place where how do you heal an attachment wound if your partner isn't interested in reattaching? It takes attachment to heal attachment wounds, that betrayal trauma. One of the pieces of the methodology at affair recovery is in that small group, there are multiple safe people. It's kind of like a tribe where you can attach safely, where that attachment wound can begin to heal. And the same for your mate, if they're willing to do that. However, there are still going to be times where someone doesn't care and they've chosen not to, or there are also instances where they really never knew how to do it. And that's where the group can also help begin to allow them to see what healthy looks like instead of what they picked up in their own childhood.
One of my favorite teachers and authors, John Mark Comer, says, "You're both healed and hurt at the deepest levels of community." That's true for, family of origin, parents growing up. You're healed at that deepest level of attachment and community. You're hurt at that deepest levels of attachment and community. And then later on in life, you've got to do some healing, but that's going to require attaching deeply to other people to help you with that. I want to read one more question here at the end, and it is, after all the fighting for truth and pain of discovery or disclosure, what is the very first tangible step I should take for myself to begin healing regardless of what my partner does or doesn't do?
I just want to say that's the right question. It's so easy to be focused on the other person, trying to decide, are they going to do this? Are they going to do that? What do they need? What do I think? We so want our mate to heal that we don't understand that the only person we truly can heal is ourselves. And that's what I love about that question. The first step depends on how much trauma someone has experienced. And if you're the betrayed spouse and you're really struggling with intrusive thoughts as a result of what's occurred, get the trauma treatment necessary to heal, because you can heal. I've met with 3 people for 3 hours in the last 2 weeks, and all 3 of them have dropped their trauma scores from way up high, like a 56 or a 60 on the PCO5, which is 36 on this particular device, on this instrument, is PTSD. And they've all dropped down to the 20s or below in 3 hours. So don't live with that sort of trauma. If you're the wayward spouse and you're asking that question, I would say it is time to start figuring out what the heck. What is it in terms of my own developmental trauma? What is it in terms of my environment? What set me up, and what do I need to do to be safe? And the next thing is, how do I also keep my mate safe and give them what they need, the relational air they need to begin to heal regardless? Because ultimately, the person who's strayed is going to be able to outregulate their mate, typically. And they can at least be there and not do more damage by the trickle truth, but rather just give them the truth and let their mate make their own decision as to what they want to do. I mean, to me, that's a great starting place. Being safe, getting help, helping them. There are 3 people in this relationship. There's the wayward, there's the betrayed, there's the marriage. So I would say with the marriage, don't isolate. Get around other couples, healed individuals that are going through this so that you can also, as a couple, find a safe environment to begin to heal what's happened to us. So I guess I gave 3 answers to that because it's such a good question. What are the first steps? It's going to be taking care of you, and us.
And I think it does highlight the fact that this is the best question to ask. I mean, all the other questions are understandable and normal. Should I stay? Should I go? How can I get them to heal? But the best question is, what can I do for my healing today?
Even in the place, because I understand with trauma, people are going to be dot connected. They're going to be asking questions. They just can't believe. But with that agency, the other piece to ask is, how is this question going to help me heal? And why do I want to know? And at some point, just even deciding for the betrayed spouse, how do I get my life back? Well, you get your life back when you're finally able to quit trying to uncover because your mate's trying to be honest. You can accept that. And, you choose to try to put this in the rearview mirror rather than keeping it in the windshield.
Accepting agency and taking ownership, all of this is so much easier said than done. And I just want to acknowledge that it is looking at your pain head on, facing it, stepping into it, and choosing to become a different person. And so, Rick, if you were to say one last thing just to encourage the people listening, that give them some hope, I guess, what would you say?
Typically the way these days I begin a session is, what do you want for yourself today? The thing I love about that question is it's a total agency question. It has nothing to do with anything other than, okay, what do I need to do to grow, to heal? I would actually say, look, this feels absolutely impossible. I promise you there's hope. In fact, I'll sometimes say, do you believe that I believe there's hope? And they go, well, yeah. And I'll say, well, if you can at least believe that I believe, then you believe somewhat just because I believe and you believe that I believe. But in the long run, I think what helps the most is seeing other couples who've actually done it. For years, there was a belief that it was physiologically impossible for someone to run a 4-minute mile. But guess what happened when somebody finally broke that 4-minute barrier? Suddenly everybody began to break the 4-minute barrier. And it's that sort of witnessing somebody else that's able to do it that also provides the hope that it's possible for you to do it. And that's where community comes in again.
And then I'd also encourage you, again, going back to don't hit that eject button in isolation. We want to help you have that community if that's not something you have already. And so go to affairrecovery.com and explore our courses, because it might be the step that you need to get into community. Again, we're so grateful to be on this journey with you. And like we always say, to healing.